The room smelled of disinfectant and quiet despair. Machines hummed softly around Emily Carter, once a vibrant teenage girl who loved piano and running barefoot in the rain, now lying motionless on a hospital bed. Doctors had stopped using the word recovery. They preferred management. Outside the glass walls stood her father, Jonathan Carter, CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the country, a man who could buy islands, influence governments, and bend markets to his will, yet stood completely powerless before his own daughter's silent body. Jonathan had tried everything money could buy. The best neurologists from Europe, experimental therapies from the US, private hospitals that looked more like luxury hotels. Every morning he arrived in a tailored suit, and every evening he left with the same heavy truth. Emily still couldn't move, still couldn't feel her legs, still stared at the ceiling with empty eyes as if she were already saying goodbye to the world. The accident had stolen more than her mobility, it had taken her hope. Emily had stopped talking weeks ago. When nurses asked questions, she turned her face away. When Jonathan held her hand and promised miracles, her fingers stayed cold and still. One night, as rain battered the hospital windows, she whispered words that shattered him completely. "Dad, please stop trying. I'm already gone." Jonathan broke down in the corridor that night, sobbing like a man who had lost everything. For the first time in his life, success felt meaningless. He would have traded every company, every dollar, just to see his daughter smile again. A few days later, the hospital introduced a new volunteer program, parents who had lost or were caring for disabled children, offering emotional support to patients. Jonathan barely noticed. He didn't believe in comfort anymore. But that afternoon, a man entered Emily's room quietly. He wore worn jeans, a faded jacket, and eyes that carried a gentle sadness. His name was Michael Reed, a single father who came every week after finishing his construction job. Michael's son had been paralyzed 5 years earlier in a hit-and-run accident. He had fought the same battles Jonathan was fighting now: denial, anger, desperation, and loss. His son had passed away 2 years ago, but Michael kept coming to the hospital, believing his pain could still serve a purpose. Emily didn't look at him when he sat beside her bed. She didn't react when he spoke softly about the weather, about the birds outside the window. Jonathan watched from a distance, ready to intervene. But then Michael leaned closer and whispered something that changed everything. "I'll help her." Jonathan stiffened. Help her? Who was this man to make such a promise? Doctors with decades of experience couldn't help her. Money couldn't help her. Yet something in Michael's voice wasn't arrogant. It was steady, human. Michael began coming every day. He didn't talk about walking or miracles. He talked about pain, about how unfair life could be, about how his son once screamed at him, begging to be left alone, about how hope doesn't come as a sudden light but as a quiet choice you make every morning. Emily listened. One afternoon, Michael brought a small keyboard and placed it near her bed. Jonathan almost stopped him. Emily hadn't touched music since the accident, but Michael simply said, "Let her hear what she still owns." He played a simple melody, slow and gentle. Emily's eyes filled with tears. A nurse gasped when she noticed Emily's finger twitch, just slightly against the sheet. Jonathan froze, afraid to breathe. Progress was painfully slow. Emily still couldn't walk. Some days she refused therapy. Some nights she cried until her pillow was soaked. Jonathan struggled too, learning to sit beside his daughter without trying to fix everything, learning to listen instead of command, to be a father, not a CEO. Michael faced his own battles. Watching Emily reminded him of his son. Some nights he sat alone in his car, breaking down before driving home. But he kept coming back, because giving up would mean his son's pain had no meaning. Months passed. Emily spoke again, first a word, then sentences. She began physical therapy, not with hope of walking, but with determination to live. She laughed one day when Michael told a terrible joke. Jonathan cried that day, not from pain but gratitude. Emily never fully regained the use of her legs, but she regained something far greater: purpose. She began playing piano again, performing from her wheelchair. She started speaking to other children in the hospital, telling them, being broken doesn't mean being finished. On the day Emily was discharged, Jonathan stood before Michael, unable to speak. He finally whispered, "I spent my life believing power could solve everything. You taught me something money never could." Michael smiled softly. Hope only works when we share it. Years later, Emily would say that her life was saved not by a miracle cure, but by a man who understood her pain and chose to stay. And Jonathan would step down as CEO, founding a rehabilitation center in his daughter's name, one built not on machines but compassion. Because sometimes, the greatest healing begins with a whisper, and the strongest people are the ones who refuse to leave when hope feels lost.